All right.
I am up.
Hey. Ryan, hi. Brad, hi.
Hey, Walt.
You can hear me, and Brian, you can hear me.
I
So
can.
I am the default host, but and I'm a little nervous about that status, but I'm trusting that you are ready, willing, and able to share screen. Brian? Brian? Oh, hi.
Yeah, I can share. I can share a screen. Just a second. I'm trying to. So I'm trying to work off my phone to show the presentation here in the beginning, and then switch to my computer. But it's
Okay.
Yeah, when you're using both, it's definitely echoey.
Well, I'm glad to see you two guys. I've been trying all around to get into this meeting, and I finally got in through Francisca Ariatas, the district executive. Mark had to go to a meeting, and he said that I could access Francesca's co-hosting that he has set in advance. And I guess I'm there, and I guess we're recording. Maybe I'll pause that meeting in the program tonight. For those of you who've dialed in, so to speak. I guess dialed is pretty archaic term anymore, anyhow. But if you have a comment or even a memory, certainly, many of us do, or a question for Brian as he makes his presentation, use the chat. And for those of you who haven't ever before, when the chat is hit, you'll find a little box for you to write your text into. And the magic trick is to make sure you hit the return button when you're done with typing your message. That'll send your message to us all so that we can see it. At the tail end of the presentation, the last 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to hopefully be able to open it up to hear from you out there, to participate, speaking and being seen. But until that time, please use the chat so that we can get your concerns and actually observations out through Brad and Brian's responses. So I do want to then introduce the program. This is the second in our special guest evenings that our Council Alumni Association has sponsored. Our guest tonight is Brian Kent, who's really no stranger to many of us. He is a Green Mountain boy. He cut his teeth in Troop 205 in Sharon. He's an Eagle. He's a dedicated brother in the Order of the Arrow, and that's an understatement to say that he's a scouting brother. He has other handles. He goes by Major Brian Kent, in an assignment at this point with Airborne, a command assignment. I believe that's correct to say, Brian. Having really path an unbelievable career so far in service to our country. And probably among his major and most significant responsibilities right now, he's a lion den leader for his daughter who's in cups. So we all know where that's at. And with that said, Brian, I will just turn it over to you. And here you go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely happy to be doing this tonight. It's about an hour earlier from everybody else, so appreciate everyone joining this evening. And for anyone on who doesn't know me, I saw several familiar names coming either from the Facebook group I run for Vermont scouting memorabilia collectors, other people I've known through scouting. So it's good to see a lot of familiar people on here. But for those who don't know me, just to add to what Mr. Morris is saying is my kind of historical interest started and collecting interest started at the 2001 National Jamboree, which Mr. Morris is the overall scoutmaster and contingent leader for. So cool connection there. But I got interested. Didn't think I was going to. Luckily, my parents who were able to give me a few patches to take, and I think within a couple of days I needed a lot more patches. So that's where I kind of got bit with the patch collecting piece, at least. But you'll find a lot of people, the collecting of memorabilia kind of turns into wanting to learn more about the history, and that's kind of where I am right now. So the history to me is important. It's always been interesting, kind of understanding where we came from. So I'll get more into that here as we go through kind of the more formal presentation. But what I wanted to do up front is I put together a very small display that's currently on our dining room table. So it's not quite the size that I've put on at other places, but I'll be able to show some memorabilia, talk about it, especially for any youth that are on, or for scout leaders who need to do, especially in like COVID environment, paragraph 4C requirement for Scouting Heritage Merit Badge, which requires either meeting with a scouting historian or visiting a museum or a scout memorabilia collector. I'm both a avid collector and historian, maybe unofficially titled, but hopefully this kind of suffices that requirement. So I'm going to flip my camera around here and start talking about some scouting memorabilia. And then once we're kind of done with the display, I'll transition to my computer. If you can give me about a minute or two, I'll shut off my phone, and then we'll kind of go into the actual presenter view and the slideshow I've put together for that. So without further ado, the display I put on tonight is kind of just a small element of my collection, but some important pieces I wanted to show. And so I'll kind of talk through all this stuff. And a lot of this is going to be interesting because it kind of ties into things I'll be talking about or things you'll see in the presentation. So, one of the interesting places to start when we talk about history, where we've come from. Got a couple of neckerchiefs up here from Agipo, and then moving into the Alangamat neckerchief. So one of the first Langamat items, or the first Langamat item the lodge came out with, was this neckerchief in 1990. I think there was about 25 that were given out, and then the standard Langamat neckerchief that this I believe is still awarded, and then the other two Agipo neckerchiefs from more recent history. We've got this cool Green Mountain Council National Jamboree neckerchief here. So this one is actually kind of a rayon material, and this actually comes from the 1957 National Jamboree, which is pretty cool, especially with the syrup, the Green Mountains, and the maple leaf on that. I like that one a lot. Last stand of the Yankees. So this neckerchief actually shows all the locations in the state of Vermont of the three councils at the time, being Long Trail, Calvin Coolidge, and Green Mountain Council. Got the 97 contingent neckerchief. And then here, which Mr. Morris will absolutely recognize, is our contingent neckerchief from the 2001 National Jamboree when I attended. And so really cool story, really cool history with this. I know some people have heard this before, but we did an outstanding tour of Gettysburg, and then we stood on some of the same ground as Vermont Volunteer Infantry when they actually stood against Pickett's charge there at Gettysburg. And so everyone was brought together, kind of discussed the Green Mountain Boys, and then the spruce sprig that's on the bottom of this neckerchief symbolizes the spruce sprig that the Vermonters commonly put in their hats to identify each other on the battlefield. So really, really cool story, really pretty moving event that we did there. And then we've got a couple other neckerchiefs here. So I'll talk about this one. I'm not really sure what it is. We'll talk about that at the end of my presentation. And then we've got some more recent Philmont contingent neckerchiefs. Moving over here, we've got a good collection of most of the Green Mountain Council's Jamboree pieces. Starting up here, so this is from the 83 Jamboree, actually. So it was a felt square that was actually designed to give out as like a friendship gift. Got several others here, kind of going in chronological order: 89, 93, 97. The contingent was an early trade courtesy of Barry Seamays. Contingent I went to in 2001. We have the '05 pieces. Some additional pieces of that going in 2010. We've got some of our larger, our 5 pieces with the, our 5 CSPs, the back patch here from 2013, the fundraisers from 2013, and then going into the large centerpiece with 5 CSPs again from 2017.
First Jambo at the summit, or the 13 one was.
That's
yeah.
right. One of my favorite series from Vermont is the Veterans Day Parade series. And so this is almost all of them. There's one that I don't have in here, but at least the way the display is right now. This started in 1999, and I was lucky enough to be in the first one of these. They had the American flag theme, and as it moved around the state of Vermont, it started to have specific, Vermont things of importance in that town or village where it was held. And so I think this is probably one of the cooler series. And there's the Monument in Barrie, one of the cooler series that Vermont has done, and a really cool event. And then some of these other displays here. So, collecting it, to me, it's, hey, how can you display stuff and talk to people about it and the history? And so these glass frames, I'll get a Hobby Lobby on sale when they go like 50% off, but it's a good little way to kind of display things. And so this came from a scout who was both a member of NEONC and then a founding member of AGIPO. So you have your NEONC S1, which we can talk about here in a minute, and then the first flat from AGIPO there. He attended the 1973 Jamboree as well as the 75 World Jamboree. There's some other items up here coming from some brothers from Long Trail Council, some of the awards that they received, some of the event patches. This is a really neat Mount Norris fall camporee patch I've always really liked. It's a twill, but you can see Mount Norris in the background. And so for this display, these came out of actually a guy that I've been buying stuff from for a long time, but he goes to the flea markets there in Waterbury. But this is a collection that came out of Canada that belonged to a scout who again was in NEONC and then also a member in AGIPO. You see his neckerchief flap and then the Fall Fellowship from AGIPO in 1975. These items all belong to Ed Page, who is still alive and I've kept in contact with. He actually graduated from my high school almost 50 years before I did, and was a camper and then staff at Camp Plymouth for almost 6 years, maybe even 7 years. And so these are all items that he had. His Eagle Scout Award was actually donated to be recycled and used by his troop. But we have his ordeal ceremony from Nikawiji, an interesting award here. So these golden tomahawk little keychains have floated around definitely New England and been used in other camps. And so in Calvin Coolidge Council, the award was the golden tomahawk, and that was given presumably at Camp Plymouth. His stash, his staff neckerchief from Calvin Coolidge, and then another group from a soccer coach that actually had, who unfortunately passed away several years ago, but some of his items here from Weezy Khan, his ordeal sash and some of his stuff, his original Weezy R3 with his handbook, and then his neckerchief from the 1976 bicentennial from Vermont, Green Mountain Council camps. And then some more collections of items from other scouters from Vermont. And so how I normally come upon these is, other collectors or the internet. There's been several forums that, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of these kind of just populate into, yard sales or eBay or whatever it is. And so I kind of like to buy these for my collection that have a story to them or have a name attached to them. And then you can do further research beyond there. This shirt specifically has an interesting story. You can see the World's Fair participation patch came out of Middlebury. So I ended up finding the shirt on eBay. And about a year or two later, there was a couple other groups sold on eBay as sash and Eagle Scout medal, some more paperwork from Green Mountain Council, another patch. And those actually ended up belonging to the same scout. I look back, was able to find his name, is written in a shirt, and was able to actually get that to add to my collection to go with the shirt I purchased a few years earlier. This is an early 40s shirt, so it does have a Middlebury tan and red strip and a Vermont quarter strip khaki. Got a late 40s Camp Sunrise felt patch on this this shirt here. And there's just a couple examples of, I believe, the 1964 Mount Norris patch on this shirt from Franklin, Vermont, and a member of Wheezy Alacon. And then the scout who attended the 75 World Jamboree, which, interestingly enough, the merger between Wheezy and Neonk had happened in 73, 72, 73, and in 75, he still has his Neonk flap on. And then go into some more.
It's what you call loyalty, you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then go into some more of the collection here. So Long Trail Council, and we'll talk about the formation of all these, but Wheezy Alacon is the first Order of the Arrow Lodge in Vermont. And so we have all of their issues starting here at the top. So you have the right facing arrow, which is the F1, it's a cut edge, and then the F2 A and B with the rolled edge arrow facing left. We have the R1, which is the first Order of the Arrow patch issued from Vermont. Some variations of the R2, also felt, and then the R3s up here. Some event patches from Wheezy Alacon. So we have our 1969, 70, and then 71 fall fellowships and neckerchiefs from the lodge. Then the second lodge founded was Memphr Magog out of Southern Vermont and Green Mountain Council. So here you have the F1, the S1, and then both versions of the R1, the round patch here on neckerchiefs. And the center patch was pulled off a neckerchief at some point. We have our third lodge in Vermont being Nickawiji here out of Calvin Coolidge. So another thing I like to do in kind of collections is put their headquarters city. So the Bellows Falls strip. It's only Bellows Falls I know of in the country. We have our F1, our F2, and this one had the right facing arrow, and then our F3. And so the right left facing arrow is interesting because until 1950, there was no Brotherhood bars on the OA sash. They changed that in 1950. So prior to that, if you were Ordeal, you wear it over your right side. If you're Brotherhood, you wear it over your left side. And that's kind of where the right and left facing arrows come from. Then we have the Neonk Lodge, which is the fourth lodge in Vermont. We've got their F1, probably one of my favorite designs with the catamount in the center there. Their S1 and S2, and then again Rutland for their headquarters city, and then their neckerchief. Just two different variations, the same neckerchief. And then, of course, as you kind of get into collecting and the historical sides of things, this book here is all paperwork, and on top of that is an outstanding book. If you can ever find a copy of this, and I do have a scanned copy, but it's History Camp Plymouth, written by Ed Morse from Massachusetts in 1977 for the 50th anniversary, and it's just full of pretty incredible original research about Vermont Scouting as well as the Camp Plymouth program up until 1977. Unfortunately, the camp closed in 1982. And this book here is just full of Vermont history and paperwork, whether it's cards from scouts or other things. And so this is kind of how I've cataloged a lot of the stuff that I have that maybe you can't display. Good example here. Here's more of the World's Fair participation from the scout, the uniform I showed. And then the letter from Green Mountain Council about the opportunity to actually serve on the World's Fair staff. And these cards here and these merit badges, this scout was actually in the first Brattleboro troop, Troop 1 that camped at Camp Plymouth for the original 2 weeks there in 1927. And that was found at an antique shop in southern Vermont. And then books, History of the Order of the Arrow, 12 Regions, Boy Scouts. A lot of people have done a lot of really great research on top of original research. And that's kind of where our project came to a culmination. Say dozens of people in Vermont, too many to name. But we did our centennial history for the lodge in 2015. And so this kind of spurred this project on to continue consolidating the history. And so Barry Seamays right now has an outstanding digital library, essentially, of original research, compiled research, especially from guys like Rick Hokum, Sam Burnham, that we've kind of started to list everything we found in newspaper articles. And so as we kind of get more into the history of Vermont, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my computer with the slideshow. So I'm going to drop off my phone here for a minute, and I'll see you in about a minute.
Sure enough. So if you're still listening out, Brian, there's quite a world of collectors and historians, I guess I'd say. And I know we got some of them on the line here now too. Some more zealous and in depth than others, but I think we all remember our own experiences, but just to see what may have come before us is pretty cool. So Brad, any chat at this point? I'll ask you.
No questions for Brian yet, but Marco says, this is amazing. Many thanks from South Florida Council. So it's great to see representation from around the country.
Yeah. And if he's still there, I know we have Mr. Kutu, who's from Newport, but now he's been in Japan for many years now, but a great scouter. And I know he is somewhat of a collector as well. Well, thank you all for joining, and I'm not going to make a commercial here because here comes Brian again.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Everybody can hear me? Awesome. So I can't really monitor the chat as I go through this, but if anybody has any questions throughout and puts it in the chat, we just jump in here. So the other thing this doesn't show is my notes that I made on each one of these. I'm actually not sure how to pull that up. So as we go through this, just bear with me, and I may pop out of the presenter mode here just to look at specific things I wrote down. But you know, without further ado, we'll kind of get into the more formal portion of this, being kind of the presentation I put together. So several representations here from Vermont, and we'll get going through these now. So the agenda, at least for this, is kind of an introduction, which we already covered, kind of with the displays there and everything. Brief history of Boy Scouts, and you know, in case anybody isn't kind of aware of it, but also to kind of fulfill additional requirements for scouting heritage. We'll talk about Vermont, and as it says, possibly America's first Boy Scouts. I think there's arguments out there against, but there's very, very, very good arguments for Vermont having the first Boy Scout troop. We'll go through councils and camps, and I've tried to do that chronologically through the councils and associated camps. We will jump around a little bit in years for some of the memorabilia that I show. And then we'll go to kind of the order they are in Vermont, and then talk about some unique participation in national scouting events. Then we'll turn it over to general questions. So on the bottom right there is a picture from Boy's Life, and so that's a Norman Rockwell painting of the it's the Unknown Scout, I believe is what it's called. And so that goes to the story of W.D. Boyce being in London and not being able to find his way in dense fog, and a scout helped him to find his way to where he was going. And so he's kind of curious about the program and asked him, you know, who he was, what he was doing. And from there, you know, the scouting movement grew. Once he came back to the United States, it actually kind of merged with one of the leaders of YMCA, at least initially in 1910, and it was 1911 that the program transferred to James E. West and kind of took off in terms of how we know it today. And, you know, where Baden-Powell came from, the founding of this, another, you know, military guy himself, a colonel, and in the Second Boer War, essentially he was in a city that was sieged, had experience with younger boys acting as scouts, and realized kind of the importance of training them, you know, not for the military, but just kind of in ways to survive in the outdoors. And so he met, after he got back, some of his works have become famous. Some of the books that he wrote, to include the Aids for Scouting. He ended up meeting with Ernest Thompson Seton in 1906, and Seton's book there, which you can see is the Birch Bark Roll of the Woodcraft Indians, definitely you know, was able to expand on some of the ideas that he had. And so in 1907, he took hosts mainly from friends that he had, you know, whose scouts that he was able, or at that time, friends he brought boys out to Brownsea Island, actually tested kind of his ideas, and what his work scouting for boys became eventually the Boy Scout Handbook. So talking Vermont here, William F. Milne is written about in several Vermont publications, newspaper articles, all the way back from the Vermonter in 1911, an article in the Barrie Times in 1920. And Stephen Rastelli out of Barrie, who actually lives in William F. Milne's house, has done a lot of really great research and has a webpage that I can share that kind of lays out why he thinks Boy Scout Troop 1, which is supported by many others, is actually the first Boy Scout troop in Vermont. So William F. Milne is a Scottish immigrant. He started the Barrie Troop on October 29th, 1909. It was actually under a British charter. So whether he had items from England shipped over from English scouting or the original scouting for boys, I'm not sure, but had an idea what the program was. It's called the Barrie Boys or Barrie Boy Scout Club, not necessarily the troop, but that started in 1909. And really, it's well known about this troop and their formation. And then in 1910, there was a letter from the National Secretary. There's a copy of this on this webpage. It's pretty interesting to look at. That basically said, well, National Boy Scout movement was tracking Springfield, Massachusetts as possibly the first troop based on the date of founding of the Barrie Troop. And again, this is 1910. He said that, without a doubt, Barrie Troop predated Springfield, Massachusetts, and was the first troop in the U.S., with Springfield, Massachusetts being the second. Now, unfortunately, during that kind of formation year, BSA didn't really have good records. And so anything put out by the National Council since then really says we can't determine, who the first troop is based on lack of records. And so they didn't really start keeping these records until 1911. But with that being said, based on some of the pictures, what William F. Milne was doing with the Scouts, it was clearly a Boy Scout troop and probably the earliest in the country there in 1909. Some really interesting firsts for Vermont from research. So there's actually another Scout who was listed as receiving his Eagle in 1913 from Vermont. So remember, the first Eagle Scout was Arthur Eldred in 1912. So it didn't come around until 1912. So there was an article that talked about the first Scout in Vermont receiving his Eagle Award in 1913. However, several articles from 1915. So again, it's, the records Vermont had at the time or who was reporting it. But several articles listed Donald Smith of Barrie being the first Eagle Scout in Vermont on August 30th, 1915, and then followed by Clarence Pierce in 1917. And the photo or the colored postcard, likely from the teens, early 20s there on the right, is, it says the North Row tents at Camp Abnaki. So Camp Abnaki was a YMCA Boy Scout camp. However, to include members from William F. Milne's troop and the original Barrie Troop, they camped here at Abnaki. Obviously, there hadn't been any, Boy Scout or official Boy Scout camps established at the time, so they used this YMCA camp. But they did scouting activities there. The article that I found was interesting, talking about kind of the investiture and approval by National Council. So Smith had completed his final criteria to be an Eagle Scout and was actually awarded it there through a National Council 1915. And some additional firsts here. So we have Dean Arlen and Carl Johnson being the first class scouts in Vermont. They're from Proctor. And so in these early years, the scouting program was kind of changing the ranks, and it looks a little bit different than it does today. So some of these were it's always significant, but some of these were more significant just based on not as many requirements or kind of new ranks being made with very little information available at them early on. So 1912 might seem like a long time, but based on the early formation of the scouting movement, 2 years really isn't based on the speed of information at the time. And then interestingly, this comes from Rick Hokum's research. The first 2 merit badges earned. So the original 57 merit badges came from the BSA in 1911. And so we see in September 1912, the first 2 merit badges, at least recorded, being earned by Frank Bradbury, which are music and personal health. And he was from Springfield, Vermont. So Vermont's first council. The photo there on the left, I really, really like, and that came from a snip from the Vermonter, the magazine in 1911, which kind of had a really good overview of the scouting movement in Vermont. I think it was about 10 pages worth, or 13 pages, which, at the time for local news, I thought was pretty significant about an early movement. And so they talked about the first troop being formed as a local council. And so as we go through this, some of these dates are contradictory. Some say, it started earlier or later. And a lot of this is just coming from what newspapers are reported at the time, as we don't have a really good record of it. So it is kind of interesting to see that. And at least what Barry and I have talked about, and if anybody knows the actual definition is, it'd be interesting to know. But they specifically say a local council in the Vermonter in 1911, with J.F. Messenger appointed as council president. So Barry, really gets credit for the first troop, and Burlington gets credit for the first council. And that photo there, I think, is neat because if you can see the patrol flag, the fox on there is absolutely directly from the British kind of design of the early scouting memorabilia. So that to me potentially is even a British item. So the Burlington Council, we said it was a local council there in 1910. The first time we see it organized, and this was a newspaper article, is a first-class council, at least meaning they have a scout executive, was April 1st, 1920. And so at the time, we go from 1910, where they're just forming troops, and essentially the local council was the troop, and they talked about the troop one from the Unitarian Church, which is also significant because that's what Lawrence was for so long. But they had a significant scouting movement grow in about 10 years, from 73 scouts to about 250 there in 1922. So that's pretty significant. And so as we talked about first class council, H.S. Douglas there became the executive of the Burlington Council in 1920 through 1923. So this is a pretty interesting thing I came across. If anyone else had heard about this, I'd be really interesting to know. But kind of talking to Barry in preparation for this, he has a couple of notes from early Burlington Council, another camp, Flynn, which I wasn't really able to find much about, but I kind of did some digging on newspapers.com through various references, went down the rabbit hole. But to my surprise, I'd never heard about this. The first official Boy Scout camp in Vermont, from what I found, is actually Camp Mohican. And so there on the right is the Island Causeway there up near Colchester Point in Burlington. So that was originally a rail line. And a couple articles I read talked about where this camp was located. But interestingly enough, it was the 1921 newspaper article talking about a flyer being sent to local families for the 1921 season of Camp Mohican, which was a nationally certified Boy Scout camp, complete with an award process. They talked about the number of points you'd have to receive the camp emblem or the camp monogram. I've never seen any of these to this day, so it'd certainly be interesting to turn any of that stuff up. But you can see it first operated as Camp Pioneer in 1920, and then changed its name to Camp Mohican in 1921. As I said, it was actually a nationally certified Boy Scout camp. And the last piece there was from a 1925 newspaper article, but I thought it was really neat. It just kind of talks about the scouts in terms of how they have enjoyed this camp for what would be about 5 years at the time, how they take care of it. And a lot of these articles I came across talked about year-round events happening at Camp Mohican. And so the latest reference to Camp Mohican I found was 1929. But I think definitely significant in Vermont scouting history that this camp existed at least 9 years there in Burlington as an official Boy Scout camp. All right, so forgive me, I can't see the top there based on the bar here for controlling the screen, but I believe this says Champlain Council.
Yep.
This changed, so Burlington basically became Champlain Council. So early on, these councils really focused on, we saw Burlington being a troop and then moving to counties. And so as Burlington expanded to other counties, they ended up changing the name from Burlington Council to Champlain Council. And at that time, When they incorporated, they also included Chittenden, Franklin, and Addison counties. And then in April 1926, so fast forward about 4 years from what we're talking about before, from about 3 troops, they now have 8 troops existing in Burlington. And then this eventually became Long Trail Council in 1933. And a note here in terms of newspaper reporting, the 30s, and I would assume an effect of the Great Depression, definitely had an absence of reporting in the early 30s, and kind of mid 30s, we see it come back, and then still fairly significant reporting in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then kind of dropping off in local news beginning in the 70s. And on the right is a funds campaign flyer that was put in, put in Burlington Free Press in 1925. And so you can see there, President Coolidge talking about the Boy Scouts, Governor Billings, Mayor Beecher. So a lot of significant names to Vermont. And they're looking for $6,000 for their program for, I believe, 1926, which in today's dollars is about $90,000 as their operating cost. So we talked about the importance of community in terms of the early scouting movement. And so not a lot of memorabilia from the teens and 20s other than, uniforms and merit badges. There wasn't a lot of identification of troops beyond number and all that. So we kind of see a rise here in the late 20s, early 30s, really starting with the national jamborees of the community strip. And so these are all various examples, but just kind of a good point to take as an aside and talk about it. But there on the upper left is a tan and red St. Johnsbury strip. So that's your earliest strip, really dating from the 30s. You have a green and brown strip, which is the Explorer strip there in the middle, a khaki and green. And so the green and brown and khaki and red strips started in 47 and ran until about 1953. And that's the same with any of the color variations for the most part, about 1947 to 53. So you have the Arlington strip there is a blue and gold strip that's for Cub Scouts. The Kingston coming out of New York, that's a white on blue strip for Sea Scouts. The Pine Tree Council out of Maine, that is a blue on white full strip, and that is from Sea Scouts as well. And then Air Scout is known as blue on blue. And we'll see kind of some more of these as we go in the presentation, but really you identified by community back then and not council. I know several people on here are going to be familiar with the red and white strips worn on the uniform.
Yep.
And so on the left, there's several tan and red variations of that too, especially during World War II, kind of wartime cloth. So that Newport in the middle, as you can see, it looks really smooth, and that's a really, really fine sand twill. And so that was kind of just a less dense cloth that kind of, I think, would have gone to rationing and limited materials at the time. A couple more green and brown strips there on the top. Vermont, I have in there as a neat one, but it's from Vermont, Illinois. And then going into our red and white strips. And these are all towns from Vermont. I'm sure people can pick out their familiar towns here.
Brian, do you know when they moved away from those to the more or less council half moon things?
Officially, CSPs were put out by National as kind of a standard in 1973. But I mean, even to this day, I'll see troops or leaders who either wear their old uniform or kind of like the older stuff, and they'll still have red and white community strips on. But officially, it was in 1973 that National put out kind of the standard for community strip size.
Okay.
And originally, there was 3 different shapes that it could be, which is obviously morphed to, very unique things these days.
Yep. Thanks.
So Rutland County Council, this top piece is from a flyer from 1925, courtesy of Rob Cutts. I believe this is from his personal collection, but it's the only piece of paperwork that I could see that actually had Rutland County Council on it. So there may be some very, very, very early Camp Sunrise items. It did open in 1924 though, so you're probably not seeing it in 24, 25. But in terms of Rutland County Council, I think this is probably one of the only things out there I've seen. And so this was formed on February 27th, 1920. The first council president was Harvey Kingsley, and Roy Berry, who's a significant name in the scouting movement, became the executive of Rutland County Council in 1924. So interestingly enough, though this council was formed in 1920, it wasn't incorporated until 1924. And again, to me, I think that is the founding of an executive of the council. And so Roy N. Berry actually was the first regional executive for the Boy Scouts of America for Region 1 from 1920 to 1924. And then he came to Vermont, and he was actively involved in Rutland County Council, then Green Mountain Council for, I think, almost 10 years. And so without a doubt, I'm sure that once he came to the council, especially for the ability to raise and maintain funds, I'm sure that he's the one who had a big piece in it being incorporated in 1924. And past that point, you see, similar to other councils, kind of these fundraising and fund drives that were commonly advertised for in the newspaper. And so Green Mountain Council, as it is today, slightly different number based on the early formations of councils. We went from 593 to 592, and I'll explain why here in a minute. But Green Mountain Council is the older of what I say, the legacy councils that we have here in Vermont. The legacy councils I kind of consider being those that most of us are familiar with Order of the Arrow Lodges and, Ethan Allen Council, Common Coolidge Council, Long Trail Council, the original Green Mountain Council, and then today's Green Mountain Council. So Camp Sunrise, absolutely near and dear to my heart. Spent a lot of time at this place. Did all my ordeal, Brotherhood and Vigil at Camp Sunrise. Lots of work weekends. Recently was able to go to, I think, to an ordeal here just a couple years ago, even though I'm moving around the country. So it's always great to go back to Camp Sunrise and see everybody. And this is a photo or a postcard of Bush Lodge from the late 20s or early 30s. And so this first operated as a scout camp for Rutland County Council in 1924. And we'll see kind of the acreage that it actually covered. And I think parcels of that have been either sold off or changed over the years. But it was a massive area for a scout camp that included both Lake Sunrise and Sunset. And really, really interesting in terms of where the lodge name came from. So that being the dining hall there at Sunrise. The property was originally owned by the Bushes, William and his wife. And he actually gave the deed to the council here in 1928 to commemorate his deceased wife's or his late wife's birthday in her honor. And so they presented the newly constructed Elizabeth Parsons Bush Lodge. And interestingly, this was attended by over 700 people to include a speech by the Vermont governor at the time. So that kind of goes to show how important to the community the scouting program was. I think today, but especially back then, the involvement they have of, especially the governor there, presiding over basically the presentation of the lodge to the camp itself. So I want to jump out of this view real quick just to show some notes on here, because I think it's really, really interesting. But from the Rutland Herald article, Mr. Bush stated, "Today marks a milestone in the Boy Scout movement in Vermont. No single force can do more to upbuild the future citizenry of our state." That I think is really powerful to me in terms of what this guy believed and kind of where the scouting movement came from and when. So really, really interesting article. I have that I can share as well, that had a column on a full page that talked about everyone was there and kind of their speeches, but a really neat article to kind of come across about the history of how Camp Sunrise property became to belong to Vermont.
Hey, Brian, while you're kind of stopped there for a minute, we do have a few comments and questions.
Absolutely.
So we have Michael saying that maybe you'll get to this, but Governor Dean Davis was a charter member of Troop 1 in Barrie.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And then we have another question from Joseph. Did Vermont have any people at the first scout encampment at the U.S. At Silver Bay across Lake George?
So interesting that comes up. I don't know that we did, but in Stephen Rastelli's webpage, it talks about like the first Boy Scout encampment. He does mention that, and I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but he believes that the first real Boy Scout encampment actually occurred at Camp Abnaki there, the YMCA camp, predating the encampment there at Silver Lake. So I'm not sure if Vermont sent anyone there, but I would assume they did, just based on doing events with New York, Maine, New Hampshire, Canada, as early as the 20s that I saw in newspaper articles.
Perfect. I think that's everything. Thank you.
So this emblem here, for a while, we thought that this might be a pre-Order of the Arrow Society from Vermont, from Camp Sunrise specifically. So we'll talk pre-OA societies further in the presentation, but what I included in here, which I thought was cool, is to, give context to things, or, give context to memorabilia we have. So I knew this was from Camp Sunrise. I thought there was Order of the Arrow, but I was able to find this newspaper article. And so this talks about essentially a couple of new programs at Camp Sunrise in 1933, specifically the Arrow CS. And it talks about the people who won the Arrow CS. So, not everybody could buy a camp patch. In the earlier days of scouting, they were typically earned as awards from a point system. And so this, what I believe is an example of the Arrow CS emblem they're talking about in this article from 1933. So pretty interesting early camp patch from Vermont. So this is a map of Camp Sunrise. And so I talked about kind of the expanse that Sunrise used to cover. And so on here is a hand-drawn map from 1931 that I think probably was the template to the official USGS Geological Survey map from 1933. And so on here, you can kind of see the hand-drawn locations and all the stuff that scouts can do, all the activities and the trails and everything. I think it's really neat map. And on the back of it, it's got a bunch of merit badge information. And this map, I think, is what eventually became this map. And so this is a 1933 U.S. Geological Survey map. This was one that was folded in an envelope to send out. And then I have a larger version of this. It's about 2 feet by 3 feet. But really ornate map. And I'm not sure, maybe the name is in there. I don't know if we've been able to find research about him, but I know Rob Cutts from Massachusetts, another big historian, has other camp paraphernalia that's similar to this, with kind of the darkened images and a really ornate map, but just really beautiful map with all the points from the camp back in 1933. And so here's some original photos from Camp Sunrise. Interesting story from Rick Holcomb. He's out there for one of his mini work weekends, and man shows up and starts talking about Camp Sunrise, which, everybody knows that Rick absolutely loved. And so talking to him, this guy eventually sent him or gave him these photos. And so these were all original photos or scans of those photos from 1933. And I thought, interesting is there on the bottom right, the donkey they had. And so that's the hill there overlooking where I think the latrine and shower house is at Camp Sunrise currently. You've got the waterfront there on Sunset Lake. And then the guy in Native American regalia there on the lower left is a camp counselor. So I don't know what program that was for. Interesting, we don't see really any reference of Native American regalia at Sunrise until 1940, which I'll talk about later. But some cool photos, and just scouts as staff there in Sunrise in 1933. And so we talk about context for items. These are the following are 3 original photos that I ended up purchasing off of eBay. But it shows there Ben Butterfield, him and his dad were prominent figures in Green Mountain Council for at least quite a many years in the Rutland Troop. They're wearing the Camp Sunrise CS Sunburst emblem there on their scout shirts, which is similar to what I showed earlier. And I believe this is at their Eagle Scout Court of Honor. And then here we go is a staff photo that Dr. Paul Stanalonis was able to kind of give some insight on, which I thought was really interesting. I sent him copies of these photos and the map, and he certainly and thoroughly enjoyed them. But this, he believes, is the staff photo from 1950. And interesting, you can see that emblem there they're wearing with the CS shield that's split green and blue. And so, again, finding kind of interesting things in memorabilia. We actually couldn't confirm this was a Camp Sunrise patch until this photo was found. And so now we know almost the year that it fits, and that it was actually a Camp Sunrise patch. And so in this photo, you've got Ben Butterfield there on the bottom left, next to his dad, I think Sid Butterfield, and he is wearing Green Mountain Council strip. and then several of them from the previous photo wearing their Eagle Scout awards. They were probably awarded in the previous photo. And then another neat photo of the Camp Sunrise Dining Hall, and this is from, again, 1950, and so Dr. Stanalonis thinks he's in this photo somewhere. Wasn't able to find himself, but he does think he's in this photo. And so these are several of the Camp Sunrise emblems or patches over the years. So on the top left there, the CS arrow from 1933, and then the felt sunbursts. And those, from what we know, probably go through the early to mid 40s, all the way through the early 50s. The CS round patch there on the bottom from 1957. The Apache patch, it's basically a silk embroidered patch there on the upper right from the late 50s, early 60s. The Sunrise Rooster, I'm not sure if the one without BSA was used, but the one with BSA from around 1964. And then once Ethan Allen Council was formed and had both Plymouth and Sunrise at Ethan Allen Council camps, and so you can see the Sunrise scroll there on the bottom denoting Sunrise. And then the two emblems there with the pine trees, they are affiliated with Camp Sunrise, but we haven't confirmed that yet. And so I'll talk about that at the end. If anyone has any information on those, it'd be pretty interesting to find that out. So Camp or Windsor Wyndham Council. So interesting that they had a lot of postcards for Camp Plymouth and Windsor Wyndham Council, or Wyndham Windsor Council, which you don't see from a lot of the other councils. But they were formed in 1926 and obviously changed their name in memory of President Calvin Coolidge. He passed away in 1933. They changed his name there January 1st, 1936. There were about 40 scouts that served as Calvin Coolidge honor guard, both blocking traffic and then actually being at his burial there, I believe, January 7th, 1933. And then they also have the first 3 Silver Beaver Awards attributed to Vermont in 1932, and the Silver Beaver Award was created in 1931. This is a really interesting postcard I picked up actually probably the last year or two. But as it says, Boy Scouts at Calvin Coolidge grave, you can actually see the flowers there. So this, I believe, was taken at his burial, and these are all the Scout Honor Guard from that there in Plymouth Notch Cemetery. Really interesting to see this. A haze in the photo, and from other photos from his burial, in a newspaper article I found, it was probably rare, at least from, I remember growing up in Vermont, that there was no snow at the time, but it was slightly warm with some sort of a haze and sleet, and that's what explains for no snow on the ground. It probably is why they could bury him at the time too. So Camp Plymouth, first opened in 1927, operated by the Windsor Wyndham Council, and then obviously the Calvin Coolidge Council. So it was originally created as a Girl Scout camp in 1925. From Ed Morse's book, it sounds like it didn't have huge success, so they ended up selling the camp to the Windsor Wyndham Council, and then started camping in 1927. And as I mentioned earlier, it actually started with just a group of Brattleboro Scouts from Troop 1 for about 2 weeks with a camping staff of 8. Other boys from around the council had heard about the camp, wanted to go, and I guess the staff agreed to stay on for another 2 weeks. So I thought it was really interesting. And then through 1954, they shared camping seasons with Girl Scouts, and I believe after that point it changed. But the camping season typically was the last 2 weeks in June, and then all the way through July, which averaged out to be 5 to 6 camping weeks during the season. On the right side is a Camp Plymouth brochure, just the front of it, from 1936. And some more items from Camp Plymouth, the Camp Plymouth Dome, which you'll see more of here in a minute. And then on the left is a confirmation postcard for applying to Camp Plymouth to attend. And this came from the same scout who was one of the first campers at Plymouth in 1927. And this postcard was postmarked 1930. And on the bottom right, just another postcard from Camp Plymouth there with scouts playing on the parade field. So Camp Plymouth items, interestingly, on the left, that ribbon we'll talk about later on, so I'll save that. We do have the bottom left is kind of neat, the Camp Plymouth skipper patch. So there's definitely a move for camps in the 40s, 50s have a lot of, and 60s, have a lot of swimming and aquatic activities. The top, as I said, the Plymouth Dome. These are felt patches, and the bars on top, we think at least denoted number of years as a camper. So you'd get your dome the first year and then add those bars for subsequent years of attendance. And then the upper right, which is a really neat tribute, is the 50th anniversary patch. Same design that was on the front of Ed Morse's book, and so it uses the Camp Plymouth Dome there for the 50th anniversary. And then the famous Camp Plymouth skunk there down at the bottom right. I've seen that emblem used for other events and camps, but at least for me growing up, that was probably the most recognizable Plymouth item. There was the Camp Plymouth skunk.
Yep.
So the Owl Council, and I know Mr. Morrison mentioned this as well as the camp here before he did the presentation, but the top there is a letterhead from the Owl Council from 1927. So this council existed. One of the shorter-lived councils, 1926 to 1930, is Orange, Washington, and Lamoille councils, thus making Owl. They actually eventually expanded to other counties. So I think there's 5 or 6 counties that they had before they merged. And interestingly enough, there's a 1930 article that talked about them drastically expanding, and we know that they merged eventually with Green Mountain Council. I'm not sure when, but as early as 1930, they were talking about expanding. And so again, I would just assume the Great Depression had an effect to this, but a booming council that kind of went away and was eventually absorbed in Green Mountain Council.
Yeah.
The first scout executive was Joseph Wilson, and he stayed on for all 4 years of the council.
Yeah.
On the right is courtesy John Hoffman. I was able to take a picture of the actual brochure, so it's pretty cool to actually be able to hold this and flip through it and read it. But this is the council prospectus for the 1929 and 1930 camp season. So they operated Owl Council Camp in Peachum Pond, had an owl as their emblem, and the scouts nicknamed this Little Bear Lake. So interestingly, that they served 200 scouts in 1928 for a cost of $450 a week, which in today's dollars is about $67. And that was during the 29 to 30 season. And so from another letter from Rick Hokum's archives, you can see from the scout executive, J.F. Wilson there, he said, enclosed, please find your monogram awarded for good scouting at the Owl Council Camp. This is given to you for work done at camp, and the wearing of it should stimulate you to continue good work in scouting. So put it on your sweater so that all the scouts can see. So it goes back to what I was saying, where typically a camp emblem was awarded to scouts, and so it'd be kind of a badge of honor that they would wear. And so on the upper left, this is courtesy of Harry Henriksen. That is an original Owl Council Camp emblem, I believe, that actually went with that letter from 1927. And then the photos here, bottom, and then the top right, these are from a 1928 newspaper article talking about Owl Council Camp, and the upper right was the staff for that season, scouts camping in the bottom left, and then there in Little Bear Lake on the bottom right.
Yeah. We once had a fall fellowship there, thanks to Rick and Stan Burnham's research. And we thought it was right now as part of Groton State Forest. We tracked it down, and we had a nice fellowship there.
That's really neat. So Green Mountain Council formed in 1928. So on the left there, you didn't really see the community strips. So this would be a 1/2 council strip. You didn't really see these until the late 30s, early 40s, typically for executive wear. And so this Green Mountain Council 1/2 khaki and red strip would have been somewhere in the late 40s, early 50s. So this, like I said earlier, is one of the first legacy councils, and their headquarters remain in Rutland. And then Roy N. Berry continues as scout executive through this time. And this served southwestern Vermont until its merger with Calvin Coolidge, creating Ethan Allen, which covered all of southern Vermont there in 1965. Long Trail Council, coming from Champlain Council, formed or incorporated on February 1st, 1933. So Walter Weldman, another prominent name there, served as scout executive for 10 years. And then, as I say on here, no mention to council camp in the early 30s. So we know Mohican from at least 20 to 29. And then Barry in his notes kind of uncover this Camp Flynn, Nicholas Pond. I wasn't able to find much on that, but at least from the years of 1930, 1937 to 38. So I do need to do more research on that one, but it is at least mentioned. And then they served Northern Vermont until they merged with Ethan Allen Council to form Green Mountain Council 592 and officially in October 1972. So Camp Zackwoods 2. I was teasing Barry Seamates because he couldn't be on tonight. So this is going to be a teaser for him for the future for a much in length, as well as a great display of memorabilia from Zackwoods 2 and Mount Norris Scouting Reservation. But just kind of briefly to cover it, this was the council camp for Long Trail Council that eventually kind of became Mount Norris Scout Reservation. So it opened 1940. It was on Perch Pond there in Hyde Park, Vermont. The Green wasn't Green Mountain Power Company, but the Green Mountain Reservoir was essentially formed by the power company damming the area up, and this actually ended up flooding the scout camp, and they were able to use funds from a lawsuit to purchase land there on Lake Eden, and that became Zackwoods 2, which operated in 1949 and 1953, and then changed their name. Same property would change their name to Mount Norris Scout Reservation in 1954. And so actually I hadn't heard the story before. This is from some of Barry's research. Thought it was pretty interesting, but basically how the mountain got its name, and thus Mount Norris Scout Reservation got its name. But it seems that there were several surveyors out, and because one of the gentlemen already had a town named after him, the mountain ended up becoming named after Jonathan Norris. And so from Zackwoods 2, we have Mount Norris Scout Reservation. Calvin Coolidge Council, coming from the Wyndham Windsor Council. So Edward Knapp served as their scout executive from well before 1936 with Wyndham Windsor Council all the way through 1942. This served southeastern Vermont there, Bellows Falls area. Of all Vermont kind of memorabilia and scouting items, Calvin Coolidge seems to have the least amount. Very few camporee items, very few council items that really I've seen. And their red and white full strip there, their council strip of all the red and white Vermont council strips is the hardest to find. And so kind of talking about the scouting movement growing, especially after World War II, you know, it booming as an organization. And so this came from a Vermont Life article in May 1950, but I really think it's a really unique, you know, talk about the Green Mountain Boys connection, but a really unique way that they kind of wrote this article intro. That was about a 4 or 5 page article about the scouting movement of Vermont, but you can kind of read that for yourselves there, but I think a really good tribute to the Green Mountain Boys and kind of unique way to talk about their history. But Vermont Life in 1950 said there were over 4,000 scouts between the 3 Vermont councils. And this was impressive to me, that between about 300 at Zackwoods 2, and then 96 and 100 scouts each between Plymouth and Sunrise a week, there was about 500 scouts attending camp per week in Vermont for 5 to 6 weeks. So if you kind of do the math on that, you know, that's almost 2,500 to 3,000 out of those 4,000 scouts attending summer camp every year, which is pretty impressive.
Wow.
So this kind of begins the merger period for Vermont. So Calvin Coolidge Council and Green Mountain Council 593 merged, created Ethan Allen Council in 593 in 1965. Douglas Crichton served as scout executive for the entire council's entire existence, about 7 years. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know this before, but from a Bennington Banner article, they talked about a contest to name the council. And so scouts from both Calvin Coolidge and Green Mountain Council participated in it. And I don't know if it was unanimous, but there were several scouts from both councils that thought it should be named Ethan Allen Council, fitting, especially with Bennington there and kind of Ethan Allen's tramping ground. So thought that was neat in terms of how it got its name. It was approved in 1965. And at its formation, it included 153 scout units with almost 4,000 registered scouts. So we're going from 4,000 scouts across Vermont in 1950 to now almost just 4,000 in one council alone. They also oversaw both Camp Plymouth and Sunrise. And as I was talking about earlier, there was actually a reference to Camp Mohican in 1925 about every scout a swimmer. And that kind of came back up in a similar way. But in 1967, Camp Sunrise had a pretty successful aquatic camp program. There's a lot of water-based activities and life-saving merit badge. There was a series of neckerchiefs they had for that program as well. And so Ethan Allen Council camps, kind of on the memorabilia side, you'll see a lot of these patches. And so that did include both Sunrise and Plymouth, at least in the early years. You can see the skunk on there, and then the tent for Sunrise. They had a scroll that would go under this patch here on the left that either said Sunrise or Plymouth. And they went away from that, and I think 1969 is the first time you see another Ethan Allen Council's Camps patch with the Minuteman on it. Both Scouts and OA regularly met at both camps. Interestingly enough, Camp Plymouth was closed for 1 year, I believe, in 1968. And then with the mergers in 72, it became Green Mountain Council camps, which included Mount Norris, Sunrise, and Plymouth, until Plymouth unfortunately closed in 1982 and became a Vermont State Park. It was interesting during this time, there was generic Ethan Allen Council camps patches, but they actually had specific neckerchiefs both for staff and campers. We'll show here. So the bottom left, it says Ethan Allen Council camps, and I do really like this design with the musket and powder horn. But you have Sunrise and Plymouth on the right. So even though they had a generic patch, they did have different neckerchiefs for the camp you went to from the council that summer. So moving towards the Order of the Arrow in Vermont, the right photo there is actually of Goodman in his military uniform as a lieutenant in 1918 when he was in the Army. So both him and Edson, the founders of the Order of the Arrow, were both in the Army. And so they were working at Treasure Island as staff and actually as camp director, and wanted to essentially recognize scouters for kind of a cheerful spirit, going above and beyond their fellow campers. And so they created this program, which eventually became the Order of the Arrow, with the first induction occurring on July 16th, 1915. And so the original induction is interesting because it actually occurred in front of all the other scouters. And so the call out was actually calling them out and then putting them through the ceremony in front of their fellow scouts. And so the first meeting in the Grand Lodge, which is, the Order of the Arrows was known, was in 1921. And then in 1948, actually at the 1948 National Order of the Arrow Conference, it was the official layout of the Order of the Arrow being the Scouting Honor Society for the Boy Scouts of America. And I mentioned this before, but pre-OA societies, so pre-Order of the Arrow societies, honor camper societies in Vermont. So the idea of the Order of the Arrow spread throughout the country. And while it may not have had a specific lodge affiliation or Order of the Arrow, there were Order of the Arrow or honor camper societies that existed. So the first one existed in Sunrise, actually in 1940. And in that piece from the Bristol Herald, you can see known only as OS, which I've hypothesized is probably Order of Sunrise. They selected their first candidate, and you can see at a campfire and an impressive Indian ceremony. So that tells me absolutely directly connected to Order of the Arrow. And then the bottom there talking about the Camp Plymouth Honor Society beginning in 1946. And so the ribbon I talked about or mentioned earlier, I actually have the scout's name who earned this, but this is an original ribbon from the first Camp Plymouth Honor Society there in 1946. And that program really eventually became Nicowegie Lodge there in 1953. So the founders connection to Vermont, both Edson and Goodman had homes in Vermont, with Goodman having a summer home here in Vermont. He was a member of the executive board for Green Mountain Council, as well as a member of Medford Magog Lodge. And actually Colonel Edson and his family are buried here in Vermont. And the bottom here, the Friendship Bar there, the Order of the Arrow for the 50th anniversary had stone sent from all the lodges to create a fireplace. So this still exists as an LLC under Goodman's granddaughter, I believe, in Vermont still exists. And then the Camp Plymouth patch on the left, I believe Edson attended this event. And then in 1965, there on the bottom right is the conclave patch from Camp Sunrise that you can see that Dr. Goodman actually attended that here in Vermont. And so interesting to me is that that was the 50th anniversary of the Order of the Arrow. And so, you know, the founder could have gone anywhere he wanted all over the country, and he chose to be in Vermont at Camp Sunrise's area conference there.
Where else?
Absolutely, that's right. So as we move to Order of the Arrow, I know I'm running probably here pretty long, so this wasn't kind of the key piece of the presentation. It's kind of the earlier stuff, but we'll go through the Order of the Arrow here. The first official lodge is Weezyala Khan from Long Trail Council, formed in 1946 at Camp Zackwoods. And, you know, through Rick Holcomb's research and kind of the Vermont lore that at least was taught to me over the years, and I've got a write-out of this. We haven't been able to confirm, but it mentions prominent members of the Philadelphia Lodge coming to actually do this induction in a similar event there with Nicowegie. So whether or not that was original members of the first ceremonies there from Treasure Island in 1915, or it was actually Goodman or Edson themselves, unknown, but it does make sense to me that maybe they were actually at some of these early Vermont events. And they merged with Neonk Lodge 398 in 1973. So actually beyond Ajapo now, Weezyala Khan was the longest running lodge in Vermont. Memphis Lodge was founded at Camp Sunrise in 1948. So I believe their charter was late 1948, but I believe they probably held an induction in the camp season of 1948 or at the end of the camp season 1948. And the first time that I saw them mentioned in the camp brochure is actually 1949 in a Camp Sunrise brochure talking about Order of the Arrow as a new feature at camp this summer. And so they're F1, their neckerchief there. And then the original fire pit for them, which Rick showed me on my Brotherhood walk there. Barry was able to take a photo for me for the Centennial Histories in the upper right. And that stone originally had a date of like 1951 on it. It cracked over time, but that is the original Memphremagog fire ring there at Camp Sunrise. So Nicowegie Lodge, interestingly enough, this was formed officially as Cole Lodge, changed its name somewhere a month or two after, probably because of the existence is another. But Nicowegie is also the name of an early pre-OA secret society there, I believe, in Massachusetts. And so not sure a connection there, but it does make sense. There's some sort of connection, but not sure what that is at this point. Their totem was the black bear. So as you saw on the display earlier, their flaps over the years all really just had the green flap with the black bear, and then their first flap was white. They hosted one event in their existence there at Camp Plymouth. There on the bottom right was the area conference patch there with their totem on the patch, and then in the upper right is actually from an earlier 30s Camp Plymouth brochure. But it kind of makes me wonder if that was some sort of pre-OA society there existing in Camp Plymouth prior to Nicowegie Lodge or the Camp Plymouth Honor Society in the early 40s. So Neonk Lodge, this was the last lodge to be formed in Vermont before the mergers, and merged with Weezyala Khan to form our lodge today, being Ajapo. And so it was a short existence, about 7 years. Their first flap there on the upper right with which I think is a really beautiful profile of the catamount with the cat tracks there on their first flap, and then a really, really nice neckerchief pie patch that they have there with the catamount growling and the mountains in the foreground. And John Dyer Jr. actually had a really good contribution to some of our history. I think he said he was at a recent tag sale and actually found the original Neonk bylaws, which none of us had ever seen before. So we do have a scan of that, and that lent some additional information about the lodge that we didn't really know before. So we're still always finding stuff and adding to the history that we know from things that are still out there. And of course, the longest running lodge in Vermont now, Ajapo, chartered in 1972, is the Buck. as we know, we meet, both at Sunrise and Mount Norris Scout Reservation. We've met at some of the historical areas and fellowships over the years. And in the left there is the first flap. So you can see there's no fleur-de-lis on this patch. This patch is the S1, ran from 1973 to I think early 1978, was replaced by the S2, which had the fleur-de-lis on it. And then one of our more recent flaps there on the bottom. And I've always got to make a plug, but I am missing the patch on the bottom right. That's from Norwich University Spring Fellowship in 1983, which anyone on here who was around at the time can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was canceled due to a flu outbreak. And so these were actually mailed to participants. But if anybody else out there has an extra one and wants to share, please let me know. So Vermont also participated from really the beginning of national scouting events. They started from day one. So even in the canceled 1935 National Jamboree, because of interestingly enough with COVID, last time we saw this happen was 1935 with a polio outbreak. That was canceled and then held in 1937. But there was 44 scouts that were planned to attend the 35 Jamboree, and then in 37 between the councils, there was about 50 scouts from the two councils there that attended the 1937 Jamboree, which, as I put there, was about a cost of $60 for the trip. There were several that attended all these jamborees over the years. We've really had continued presence from 37 all the way to present jamborees that we hold. And then, interestingly enough, there was only a scout from Burlington that attended the World Jamboree in 1937, and I believe he also attended the National Jamboree the same year. And this is actually a photo of the contingent from Vermont from 1937. This was found in some files that Barry was going through actually at the council headquarters. This is a photo the council owns. The only reason we know it's 37, I think names are written on the back, but they're all wearing the 1937 Jamboree patch. And obviously looks like a gateway. So I'm not sure if this was actually held at the pre-camp weekend, but similar to my experience in the National Jamboree, they actually did a week of pre-camp prior to attending the Jamboree in 37. And I'm sure that's been a common feature kind of throughout the years. But a really neat photo of the Vermont contingent. And then other events that Vermont's attended for national events. This goes anywhere from the Mohawk Indian Village at the Eastern States Exposition. There was 4 scouts that attended that. It began in 1920. We had 4 Vermont scouts attend in 1921. The World's Fair we talked about a little bit with the scout uniform I showed. That's a patch from that event there on the bottom right. The Boy Scouts had a service contingent there. And between 2 years, in 1939 and 1940, there was actually 44 million visitors to the World Fair. And World War II obviously changed that. But Philmont, the earliest we've seen at least, is 1955 from Calvin Coolidge Council, and then I know there's one in 57, and then over the years several more. The National Order of the Air Conference, first reference we saw to that of Vermont attendees is 1954, and then several national meetings throughout the 50s and 60s, all the way up through I know several in the past years of Vermont attending national level events. And then kind of an interesting thing, I know it's come up in the memorabilia Facebook group a lot, but kind of the Verbeck or Quaymont camporees. And so the patch here is the Verdun camporee in Canada. This is the earliest that at least I know of that we attended or had events like this. And so this was created by the Scout executive at the time, but Larry Dean is the one I was trying to reference earlier from Troop 1 of the Unitarian Church there in Burlington. And his scrapbooks have given us an incredible amount of history of Vermont scouting. But he wrote in here, some 300 Brothers Scouts of Green Mountain Council rolled there by train. And then those hours together in the Old Verdun expedition had a deep and stirring meaning to those taking part. So between the Canadian and Vermont Scouts, they planted a friendship tree in a park. And so at least what I could find is this Verdun exhibition ground really showed kind of the horrors of World War I. So Larry Dean writes about this as a very powerful event, and him recalling this some 20 or 25 years later very vividly. So it was obviously a great event that had a lot of meaning for him. And now finally, my what's it kind of questions before we get into our final questions here. But these are two patches that the left one with the pine tree came with this scrap, which you can see from the envelope. Unfortunately, there's no postmark date on it, but it did come paper clipped from someone at Camp Sunrise. So I do believe these are affiliated, but I don't know what years they were from or what they were for. So if anybody has any information, that'd be really interesting. And then my final what's it is the Philmont symbol with embroidered VT. And so I thought this was an interesting neckerchief. No idea if it's from a Philmont contingent or just something somebody put together, but pretty interesting to me. So if anyone has any more information, then that'd be good to know as well. And that concludes the floral portion of the Vermont scouting history, and I'll definitely turn it over to anybody for questions, as I'm sure I didn't cover a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that are out there.
There weren't too many questions in the chat box here, but Clint did point out that we are lucky now to have 500 scouts at camp for the entire season, and how times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Reading some of the figures and numbers, yeah, that I meant to ask to kind of see what the council's numbers were now, but yeah, that's definitely times have changed. So it's definitely encouraging to see kind of the movement and it continuing. And then, I'm glad that my daughter can hopefully follow my footsteps if she so chooses now. So.
Really good. Yeah.
Do we want to open it up to people who want to participate?
Unshare your screen, please.
Let's see.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, good. Thank you. There we go. That's showing Mike Kutu there. Got his hand up.
I do have a comment to make about Mount Norris. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In 1999, a long-term family friend of ours by the name of Dr. Perry Fitch, who graduated from St. Johnsbury Academy with my grandmother, who was a dentist in Newport for about 60 years. I took him down to Mount Norris at his request for what he said was the 50th anniversary of the purchasing of the land there. And he should know because he was on the council camping committee and one of the individuals who signed the lease, the deed, whatever, the purchasing agreement to buy Mount Norris. And he hadn't been there in over 50 years, or over 40 years, excuse me. So he was very pleased and impressed to see how nice the place was. But anyway, Dr. Perry Fitch, Silver Beaver Award winner in 1950, founder of Troop 1 in Newport that disappeared a million years ago. Anyway, if you don't have that, I can type it up and send it on to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think I wrote it down, but if you want to send that, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Brian, I don't know if anybody has asked you, Brian, if they want to get in touch with you, is there a way to do that that's best, or?
I will type my email into the chat right now for everyone, but it's brkent09@gmail.com. And that would be the best way to reach me. And then I also have a Facebook group, but email would be the best way to reach me. And I can, share things or, if anybody has questions or additional history, I'm always very open to receiving stuff like that and just adding it to the history files.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in here?
I'm curious why, because as soon as they created this name Ajapo, they realized that there was already another lodge with the same name, older, and yet they never changed it. Anybody know anything about that? So even today, there are two Ajapos.
I don't. I had heard a story though that in a conference between Neonk and Wheezy, they came up with the idea, oh well, deer or buck for Vermont, what is it? Lenni Lenape, it's Ajapo. Somebody's like, well, there's already an Ajapo, and somebody said, well, we don't really care. So national ever forced to change. So
yeah, Mike, it's been discussed for years, and you know, obviously when it went through with the original charter, nobody thought it was odd, and they just let it go through. Go figure.
Well, Barry, you missed the, yeah, he's
Like,
sending you his
come on.
mad face. Yeah.
Yeah, what I miss.
You missed the teaser that Brian gave regarding your fountain knowledge about Zach Woods and Norris and all
Oh.
that. So,
Yeah, we'll save that for another night.
yeah, yeah. So I have a question for Brian about launch OA ceremony. You mentioned that after the 48, I think it was, first, national gathering, they formalized things a little more. And from what you have in the way of the manuals and all handbooks going forward and ceremonies, has it changed that much? Do you know?
I haven't dug a lot into the ceremonies booklets. I know that it has changed as what people have told me, but between comparison to like today's ceremony and what would be in like the 46 or the 48 ceremonies book, I unfortunately couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Right.
The big thing was formal in 48. That was the first order there handbook was released actually at the 48 NOAC. And that's where the program, I think, really became standardized and formalized under Boy Scouts of America. And that's where you kind of see the standardization of ceremonies and everything as well.
Right. Right.
Well, to add on a little more to that, I actually found and rescued what I believe is the first copy of the first degree or ordeal ceremony from Zach Woods. Didn't find it there, but I've got enough information handwritten on the document to lead me to believe that it belonged to one of the charter members. There's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of components, verbiage that's been modernized over time, but most of the ritual it's very consistent. Yeah. Really.
About the black sashes and that came back a little bit, I think. Do either of you guys want to comment about that? Wasn't the original sash black with a white arrow?
That's right. I don't have the book right in front of me, but there was some of the original Native American regalia they'd wear. It was actually just a black sash with a white line. And for vigil, it was kind of a very ornate triangular style sash from the original ceremonies.
Again, here we are in Vermont, and to just hear again about Erna Goodman's connections here and Friendship House being here, we got a lot to honor and keep going forward with here in Vermont in the current Green Mountain Council. So, wish you could stick with us a little more here, Brian, to tell you the truth tonight. Anybody else? This is open mic at this point, and
so I just threw into the chat pod that just clarification on the map of Camp Sunrise that there was there was that first map that was the hand drawn, but then the one that was published by National Survey out of Chester, Vermont, and they've unfortunately gone out of business. But that's where that map came from.
That's right. Thank you. I remember us talking about it at some point. That's what it was.
Well, just awesome. I thought I saw Mark Saxon come back on. I don't know if having joined us, if you want to say anything, Mark. Mark is our not so new, but relatively new council executive.
Hey, thank you so much, Walt, and Brian, everybody. I want to thank you for being here and peeling back some of the pages of history. Had some excitement recently being able to have some good excuses to comb through the council archives. I don't know if you actually shared this earlier. I had to be on another Zoom call. Trust me, I would have loved to have been on this Zoom call instead. But we've recently been digitizing some of our source documents. So I thought I'd share a little bit from the council archive. But this was sort of the original plan for Mount Norris Scout Reservation that we have in our archive here, dating back to 1950, 51. So I thought this would be a little fun to share, and we have this digitized now. And then this was the original deed that we had for, I think the arrangement was $200 or $2 in recording fees here. But yeah, you can all now see this. And what I love to see on these things is some of the old stamps and ways that they actually paid for it. So anyway, interesting property and how that was pieced together. But anyway, for those who stayed, I thought this might be fun to share with the group. So, but certainly appreciate everybody's time here. We've got some really big plans coming up. I'll stop sharing now, but later this month, the history continues. So we've got, starting really on the 13th of May, probably about almost 24 folks who've committed to coming out to Norris, really putting their back into a lot of projects to get it ready for our scouts this summer and what's going to be a very memorable year. I know a number of us are going to be headed to Sunrise this weekend for our first ordeal of the new year. So a lot of activity, and I'll certainly be around for both of those. And I would encourage you to stop me and to share a little bit about what gets you excited about scouting and our future here in Vermont. So I always look forward to meeting scouters on the trail. My sort of Moby Dick experience in scouting was going to the National Jamboree in 2007. You know, Barry, I think, Walt, you were there. I've seen a number of friendly faces that were at that Jamboree in '97. And as a scout from Rhode Island, I just couldn't wait to get my hands on one of our skiing cow patches here from Vermont. But there were so few Vermont scouts at the time, and I was so new to this concept of patch trading that I could never find one. So I do have in my office a picture of Barry and Walt hanging that I rescued from our archive that also has that patch framed. So anyway, if you come to my office, you can relive that memory. And to me, that was just something fun to be able to unearth and to put back on its rightful display. So looking forward to getting back to National Jamborees, maybe a little while before that can happen. But thank you everybody for making scouting not just something that's in the past, but has a great future here for our kids.
Yeah. Well, we all have it in our hearts. That's what we're here doing tonight. And again, I want to thank Brian so much. What an outstanding Green Mountain boy. Come around and see us when you can. We understand that you got some stuff going there. And, you know, again, the most important thing probably, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, is being a Lion Cub den leader, man. Says it all.
Absolutely. It's probably gonna be my hardest challenge too.
Yeah, perhaps. So thank you, Brian, and thank you all again, dear friends, for joining us tonight here. And On the Scouting Trail goes. You know, we're in the stream. We had our times, and we still do have our times in the stream, and more are coming. Scouting goes on forever. All right. Good night to you all, and thank you so much. God bless you all. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Brian. That was awesome.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank
Barry
you.
and Walt, before you head out,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, one of the things I think would be a natural next step in this group would be to start putting together some